Well, happy Monday. We're continuing our study in Ephesians, and I've got the section from Ephesians 5:15 to 6:9. And it's actually kind of the more fun part of Ephesians because it's instructions for ourselves personally and for our household of faith. So it's very cool the way it sets it up. First of all, at the end of chapter 15, when it's really talking about to be careful how you live, and that is making the most of all the time that you have. So the days can be very evil if we're very idle. I guess it's really telling you to be careful of how you do your daily, whether it's devotions, your work, your time with your family, but just be focused on what God would have for you. And I like the way that it says, and speak to one another in psalms, hymns, and songs, and spiritual songs. So I'm going to keep that in mind. So now, anytime I see you guys outside of church, I'm just going to sing to you on the street. So that's what it's talking about at the end, as it gets into the instruction for the Christian household. It's really, I love the way it starts out in verse 21. It says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. So it doesn't really jump into your household relationship right away until it says, first of all, you need to submit to each other and out of reverence for Christ. So that's that submission to each other, because then it right away starts off in verse 22. It says, wives, submit yourselves to your husband. And I know there's a lot of interesting thoughts around that, and people don't like the word submit. And there's a lot of different words that you could use for that, but people try to tie it too much into Corinthians 14:34, where it says, women are not supposed to talk in church. Well, then it'd be a pretty boring worship service because they have the best voices in church. So people get hung up on the word submit, but then it turns around and says, husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church. Now, what's interesting about both those, it's talking about your relationship with each other in accordance to Jesus. It doesn't say wives submit to your husbands if, and it doesn't say husbands love your wives if. So it's not talking about do one if the other one happens. It's really just talking about that first line in verse 21 where it says submit to each other. And it's not just talking about husbands and wives, it's talking about us as brothers and sisters and as Christians. So it's one of those things where it's really heavily burdened on the men, however, because it says, however, each of one of you also love his wife as he loves himself, but at the same time, the wife must respect her husband. People just kind of go crazy with this stuff, don't they? They just say, well, I can't do it because this person does this, and I can't respect them because they don't do this, and they kind of miss the whole thing that Paul's talking about. And Paul wasn't even married, so this is an inspiration from Christ to say, you know what? He's not dealing with something that's happening right now. He's trying to deal with relationships so that something doesn't happen in the future. So if we do these things, and he's talking about just submit to each other, husband or wife. And don't forget, husbands, love your wives like Christ loves the church. And that's pretty unconditional. So, and then he goes on to, from the bond between a husband and wife and just how to treat yourself in marriage. But then he talks about children. And he says, hey, kids, obey your parents, because that was one of the first commandments that had a promise in the Bible. And it says, if you do that, it's going to go well with you in your life. And I don't think a lot of people realize that when they're younger, because you're starting to develop your self-identity, the things that your independence, those type of things. So they kind of forget that. But Paul's reminding them, say, guys, if you would just do this, remember, God gave you a promise if you obey your parents, and that's going to mean your life is going to go well with you. But at the same time, he says, hey, fathers, or this could be parents, don't frustrate your kids by, giving them one direction, living your life a different way. And it just says, basically, don't frustrate your kids so that you make it easy for them to obey you and to follow your lead as a parent. And then finally, Paul's talking about slaves and masters. And I think for me, in our purposes in this, I just kind of put in employees and bosses or employers. And it just says simply, because it talks about employees, obey your earthly bosses or your earthly employers. Respect them, give them the respect they need out of fear and sincerity of your heart. And then it turns around again, it says, employers or bosses, treat your employees fairly and don't exasperate them as well. So Paul's really taking this whole thing from Ephesians, and the big idea is, here is the relationship. And it's not an if and or kind of a deal. It's just do this on each side of that relationship. Do these things, and that's how you build yourself closer, because it's based on your relationship with Jesus Christ. So as you start looking through your day and you're thinking, oh, maybe we've had a little tiff today between someone, maybe it's your boss, maybe it's your spouse, think back to Ephesians and go back and reread this and says, where does it say at any time, I'm going to be upset with this person because they did this? Well, where's your reverence and where's your respect at that point in time? So everybody's got some issues. Everybody's got flaws. Nobody's perfect. I used to be in charge of 10,000 employees. And what what productivity would I get by exasperating 10,000 employees that can directly affect me and what I do? So this is a biblical principle that we can put into each part of our lives, whether it's with our spouse, with our kids, or maybe at work. So go out there and live your life in a relational standpoint, like Paul's talking about Ephesians. Look at yourself first and say, what do I need to do to show submission, respect, just sincerity of heart in every aspect of my relationships? So have a great Monday. Thanks for stopping in, and I'll see you later.